Welcome to Facts on the Ground. I'm Jesse Zerwell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Misty Winston. Our guest today is Dr. Jeb Sprague. He is a lecturer at UCLA and also a researcher at the University of California, Riverside. Jeb, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. This is the first time I've been able to speak with both of you.
It's good to have you. So I want to start with the biggest story that's happening in your world, I suppose you could say, which is your recent calling out of George W. Bush, or George Bush Jr., as I like to call him, at a recent public appearance he did during his speaking tour. So can you talk about your impetus for doing that and some of the dynamics surrounding that, what exactly happened?
So I really became politicized through the anti-war movement, being an undergraduate in the early 2000s. And I remember on the day of the invasion of Iraq, the campus activists groups that I was involved with, we actually walked out onto the freeway off-ramp of the 405 freeway, which is sort of like the main vein going from all the way from LA down to San Diego. It's one of the major freeways, and helicopters and dozens of police came out. And in addition to that, going to the big protests in Los Angeles with hundreds of thousands of people, and doing protests on here in Long Beach once a week for like 4 or 5 years, where we were protesting against the war. So, and I think probably a lot of your listeners have also been involved in things like that. So, that and then combined with my family experience, I have a lot of family members that were in the military. My dad was a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War when he was already in the military, and then he refused to fight and was tortured, straitjacketed, fed through a tube, the whole thing. There's a good documentary called Sir No Sir about the 60,000 conscientious objectors during the Vietnam War and the different types of like brutality, imprisonment, and sort of things they went through. In addition to that, my cousin, who myself and my family and my aunt and my uncle, have been working with for the last 10 or 15 years to try to get through his really bad, actually 15 years, for the really bad PTSD that he suffers from the Iraq War. And it's just like, it's a day-to-day really difficult struggle. He hasn't been able to hold down jobs, relationships, problems with drugs, jail, all sorts of things. And just all the sort of fissures and problems that I see. I've done a lot of interviews over the years from my academic work and activist work, but I've never really talked about the familial sort of like personal stuff like this. But that was a big motivator too, that why I wanted to go there. And actually, when I yelled at him that I wanted to make it personal, so people, and also I thought people would actually listen, because I had YouTubed Bush heckler or Bush, people protesting Bush. And there were some videos of, back when he was in office, where people had heckled him at speeches, yelling out war criminal over and over. But I knew that I would get booed quickly. So that's why when I shouted out, I started off with saying, your war has destroyed my cousin's life. You created a nightmare for my family. And then I started talking about the tens of thousands of American dead and the million dead Iraqis and the white phosphorus chemical weapons and Fallujah. And I yelled out about that. It was just like, it was political, but it was also very personal. So Mike Preisner had protested him the night before on Sunday, which I was like so happy about when I saw that he did that. And I never had met him in person. This wasn't like a coordinated thing or anything. I bought my ticket a few weeks before the event, And so I thought that was even more powerful, though, that he got disrupted both of his nights here
Yes.
on the West Coast.
Yes, more people need to do that. I mean, I've been saying this a lot, that the George W. Bush shouldn't be able to go anywhere without being heckled, without being called a war criminal, without being yelled at. You know, he destroyed just the damage that he done is really incalculable. I mean, there's really, you talk about your cousin. You know, when you were talking about it, I think on Ron Placone's show, I was sitting there thinking, you know, all of us know somebody, or we know somebody who knows somebody whose life has been destroyed by, you know, these wars. And it's, you know, I have an ex-boyfriend who has severe PTSD, very similar to your cousin's situation, can't hold down a job, you know, has had falling out with his family, and is, you know, we need to, so much of that is hidden from us. The media doesn't talk about that. We talk about this on the show all the time. We've talked about with Danny Sturzen numerous times of how they don't show the ramifications of war anymore. You know, and they all talk about supporting the troops, but when it really comes down to it, we don't support the troops. You know what I'm saying? You know, you have people like your cousin who come home, and this is not meant to be disrespectful, but broken. And, you know, and we don't ever talk about those things. We glorify the military, we glorify the soldiers, but we don't ever talk about the damage that is caused. So yeah, I mean, thank you for doing what you did. I hope that it sparks something for other people to continue doing those things. What Mike Preisner did was obviously amazing as well. He's great. He's fantastic. The work that he's been doing, especially, you know, the work that he does with Abby Martin, they're great. I actually have their shirt on right now. I wore it just for this occasion. But yeah, I mean, what you did is that's something that we need to be doing more of all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for
I
that.
hope it
Seriously.
happens at all of his other talks, and he's giving a donor meeting, I think, in Dallas and Texas. So I hope this becomes like a trend, you know, like where everyone was always trying to stop Henry Kissinger from giving talks, you know, now
Yeah.
like Bush should be like a main target, and it gets coverage because it's a former president. Like the BBC covered it, and it's had like more than 1 million views on BBC Arabic on their YouTube, and there's like millions more on their other, you know, platforms. So I mean, I think there has to be a lot of different strategies and tactics, but about a year ago, there was this Pentagon study saying that there's a high level of war weariness amongst the U.S. public because of all these wars, and so they're trying to rehabilitate these people, and you know, it's sickening. And I think their new modus operandi is really towards economic and, you know, hybrid forms of warfare, where they don't, you know, people see it as less costly, and they don't care if you know, collapse the currency of, you know, of Eritrea, or, you know, make it so Venezuela can't get cancer medicines, or send its, you know, children to, decent, you know, schools, and have money for hospitals and things like that. So that, I think that's kind of their new, they've been doing that for a long time, but I think that they're getting better at it now. You know,
yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think that we're seeing that play out right now in Afghanistan. You know, we ended the war, but we didn't. You know what I mean? The coverage that got has been really frustrating for me to watch, because we didn't end any wars. We just reimagined it. It's now going to be a drone warfare and a sanctions warfare. And, you know, they're very good at knowing how to play their hand, and how they can.
We froze their money. Yeah, their bank account.
Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what they're going to do. I mean, and the economic aspect of it, that's not really new. We've been sanctioning countries around the world for, you know, forever. But it's something that it really does, it hides it from the public. I mean, like I said, we don't ever really see war on mainstream media, not real war. But you know, when there are no quote unquote boots on the ground, it's very easy for people to pretend like it's not happening. When there is no real American lives lost or whatever, when you can just, you know, drone strike civilians. But you know, I think it's a lot easier for them to hide what's going on when they do it that way. So, and I think that's what was so frustrating about the coverage of Afghanistan for me, was that people who are pretending like that war is over are doing a huge disservice.
And what's happening now in Afghanistan is on a continuum that stretches back to Bush Jr. and even farther than that. But I wanted to ask you, Jeb, what was the ticket price to get into this event? And after you made your remarks to Bush, was there anybody there who expressed solidarity with you, or was it by and large the response we saw when Mike Preisner yelled at Bush, where it was people who were upset with the truth being presented to a war criminal rather than being upset at the war crimes?
So the interesting thing about the gathering was that this wasn't like a MAGA event where, you know, you'd have all these like roided out like guys, you know, trying to choke you to death if you yell out something. And it wasn't even all like neocons. It was sort of like wealthy CNN viewers, sort of people that, you know, don't have criticism of foreign policy consensus blob, people who read, you know, New York Times bestsellers, because it wasn't just like a Bush event. He's part of the speaker series of, there's like 10 speakers. Former UK Prime Minister David Cameron is one of them. There's a bunch of, you know, other, I think like Bob Woodward, all these sort of big US names. What's the name of the Afghani girl that was shot through the face by the Taliban?
Malali?
Yeah, Malala.
She's giving a talk there. She's really been embraced by sort of, you know, the US, you know, NGOs and so she's giving a talk there. And so you actually couldn't buy a ticket just to see Bush. Like you had to get a ticket for the whole speaker series. So there's sort of politically kind of diverse crowd, but like wealthier. I mean, like 99% like white, over the age of like probably 50. And so, I mean, so it's not like, you know, if they boo you, it's not like you're getting a cross sector of American society, you know. Not many working class people of color, so young people. But even amongst that crowd, I would say only about 15 or 20, 25% of the people booed me. There was a big group that I could tell wanted to hear what I had to say. And especially when I, you know, made it so personal in the beginning, a lot of people were kind of shocked. I mentioned, I think in one of the other interviews I've done, that I had some real elderly people sitting next to me. So I didn't put up too much of a fight. Just kind of, once, you know, a few guys grabbed me, I could have actually gone longer, but I had like people with with walkers, you know, that I'd help them put underneath their seat sitting next to me. So I mean, I kind of regret that, but you know, it was I'm just glad that it got filmed. And so if it hadn't been filmed, you know, it wouldn't have gotten the coverage that it did. So
yeah, and the coverage has actually been kind of and you're right when you said earlier that we need all different kinds of tactics, and I think that I also heard you speak about this on Ron's show, who I love, Ron Placone, but you know, you were talking about how it's great to do marches and rallies and events and all of that stuff, but we need to start confronting these people to their faces. And you know, I think that that's a really important step forward, that we need to start. And I think it's really cool that, you know, only like 15 to 20% of the crowd booed you in that sort of environment with that sort of demographic. That's encouraging to me that there were people who were interested. And also on Ron's show, sorry, I love Ron Placone, so I'm obviously going to watch his show, but you were talking about how afterwards that there was a cop who even said, you know, listen, I sympathize with you. And that's really encouraging too.
Yeah, that was interesting. That there were sort of different takes, because so when I walked out, and Jesse, you asked how much it cost. I think it was like anywhere between $200 and $600 to buy the season tickets. I actually have all the tickets for the other events. I was thinking about trying to sell them on like Craigslist or something. I don't know where can you sell like individual tickets to see who wants to buy a ticket to see David Cameron, because I know they won't let me back in. But that seat is empty.
Yeah, you're banned for life.
Yeah,
that's a funny story too.
What was this event?
Sorry
to interrupt. What was this event billed as?
It was just like the LA speaker series, you know, like notable individuals or something. And it was just average. I mean, it was like there were articles in the LA Times. I mean, they have big PR. They say they're like a small woman-owned business, but like you know, I was calculating how much money they, you know, was brought in. And I mean, there's just like millions of dollars from each of the, you know, from many of their events. Their speakers get paid 150K, I was told by someone. I guess Bush has made like 20 or 30 million dollars since leaving office on speaking events. So when I left this auditorium, it was kind of it was in the Long Beach Terrace Theater, which is like used for, you know, classical music and orchestras and opera and everything. So it's very like super you know, fancy place. And so when there was a protest out on the street, but that's like, you know, a quarter of a mile away, where there's like, you know, police and barricades. They had put up all these barricades. So when the private security guards pushed me out, one of them had taken my phone, and then I said to the other one, hey, if you give me my phone back, I'll leave, because, you know, I was still yelling. And so he's like, so one of the guys, he gave me my phone back, and he kind of winked at me. So I was like, okay, maybe that guy's like, he didn't really have a problem with what I was doing. He was just like, you know, probably like a minimum wage paid private security guy. He was a young kid. And then no Secret Service rushed me, which I was surprised by. And then when I got pushed out, one of the women that owns the Speakers LA that hosted the event came running out, just like, fuck you, like really yelling at me loud. She was so angry, and telling me like, why didn't you email us in the morning if you were upset about having him speak? Like, you know, like, okay, I'm gonna email you this morning, like, please, why did you have Bush, you know? And then she said like, you're banned, never come back. And so then as I walked out, I was surrounded by all these police that came from other angles, Long Beach police, and they were sort of upset because they were by all the protesters at the front. And maybe they thought somebody would like pay $200 to be like in the back and disrupt it. But I was like so angry that I dropped like a third of my rent, you know, to like get like right in the front, so my yell would be on his microphone. And so when the police surrounded me, they were like, we're gonna tase you, and they pulled out tasers, and I was freaked out. So I was like, no, I'm not violent. I put my hands up. They cuffed me, put me in like this kind of little tiny bucket seat in this like metal box inside this armored vehicle. And then I was just in there for 45 minutes, and then another cop came, and the cops had already been kind of grilling me, and like most of them were very unfriendly, but this guy came and opened the door and said like, the president will not be pressing charges. And I was sort of like, oh, I never heard that before, you know. And no one's ever said that to me.
Bucket list.
Bucket list. And so then they said, well, we're gonna release you out on the street. Do you have a car? How are you gonna get home? And then like, if we release you, are you gonna, you know, I was joking about this because when they were going to release me, they're like, you're not going to swing around and punch us, are you, if we release you? And I was like, what do you, like, you guys have guns and tasers, you think I'm going to attack you? Because they thought I was like super like I was yelling so loud, and I guess they were like, you have that one of the cops said to me like, you have a lot of hatred. One of the cops said that. Yeah.
Aggro anti-imperialist.
How dare you be angry at a war criminal for destroying millions of lives? And what's wrong with you, Jeb?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And so I was taught, when the cops were like, you know, all around me, I was just like, we've spent trillions of dollars on these wars. Like, you guys have family members that have been tortured through, you know, this process, you know, all this money and life's wasted. And so the cop, the kind of head cop, when he walked me over, he said like, thank you for exercising your constitutional duties, or he said something to me like that. And then I was like, whoa. Yeah,
that's always nice. That's always you know, you'll see videos every once in a while. I think there's one coming out of Australia that at a lockdown protest or something, where the cop was like, listen, I agree with you, but I'm just doing my job. And that's, I mean, as much as it sucks that he's, you know, willing to just do the job, it is encouraging that, you know, there are cops out there who do agree with us. I don't want to turn this into a cop love fest, because fuck the cops, but that is, I think that there's a a lot more of them are sympathetic to where we stand. I think that it really is just a matter of they're doing their job, and, you know, if they don't do their job, they lose their job, and then they lose their health insurance, and then they, all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, that is encouraging when you told that story on Ron's show. And I love that when you were telling the story about the cops saying, are you gonna fight us? Like, you're letting me go. Why would I fight you? And Ron's like, well, that's probably what they would do. Their brain is a steak. And I'm like, their brain is a steak. That's so great. I love that. That was a great joke. So yeah, that was a good one. Oh, it was funny stuff. And the lady coming out and yelling at you in her like formal wear.
Yeah. And then so I can give you a little more details that I didn't see on his show. So she like, it's like their like niece or daughter or somebody messaged me on Twitter asking me to like step off, basically to like stop, because I like posted some things, like Speakers LA should be ashamed, stuff like that. Like they invited a war criminal, and then they turned off their Twitter account because they were getting like massive ratios on all their tweets that they hadn't tweeted for like 2 years. So they had like 2-year-old tweets that like people were going and ratioing.
Nice.
And they had like retweeted, I guess, like their supporter or people that work with them. And so their like tweets were getting ratioed because they were on their timeline. And so I think they were probably getting like people like contacting them like, what's going on? Like, your videos on BBC getting 1 million views and, all this stuff. And so they just like turned off their social media, and then they messaged me asking me to step off.
Good. That needs to happen more too. It's not just the fact that we need to confront George W. Bush. We need to confront the people who are, getting him to come and speak at these events.
Yeah.
We need to make it clear that that's not an acceptable thing to be doing. And David Cameron, no better. Dude's a war criminal. These people should be shunned from polite society. George W. Bush should be in prison, not giving speeches. He should be in The Hague. Like, this is not the fact that, he's able to like have a painting career, whatever you want to call it, and go on Ellen and dance, and oh, he's so cute, look, he's handing Michelle Obama candy at a funeral, and all. He's a disgusting war criminal. And the fact that we rehabilitate him, you said that earlier, he's been completely rehabilitated. And it's and I think Jimmy Dore's made this joke before. They hate Ralph Nader for, being responsible for George W. Bush. They still hate Ralph Nader, but they're fine with George W. Bush now. It's this weird disconnect in their brains.
It's really funny.
Yeah. It's just really weird how we allow these just really the most despicable people on earth.
What about how Bush, his new thing is he's basically comparing 9/11 to January 6th. He's saying like, we have our own domestic extremists, just like the foreign extremists that attacked us. And it's now burrowing its way into our own country, like,
and now we know that January 6th was basically a Fed operation, and there was all kinds of infiltration by federal agents. And there was like, people texting their like, FBI handlers as they're like,
within the Proud Boys and stuff. I heard about that.
Well, the leader of the Proud Boys is a federal informant.
It was just like, it was like, it was like, there were a lot of like intense, like far right people there, and they busted into the Capitol building, and it was crazy. But it was like, that was like so minor compared to, it was like nothing compared to September 11th and the wars. It was like it was like a fly on the wall, like of history. It never would have threatened a coup. Or the institutions of our government, how powerful, how much resources they have at their disposal. It was like it was basically
a bunch
like
of rednecks taking selfies is not a threat.
Yeah, it was like an embarrassing event for them. Some people died from heat stroke. There was the one girl that got shot when she was trying to go through the window that one of the Secret Service people killed. But like, to compare that to the thousands that died of 9/11 and the wars that they used 9/11 to start,
it's offensive that they would make that comparison. It's genuinely offensive.
And everything else, it's like what happened in Syria, like that probably wouldn't have happened if not for the war in Iraq. So like the whole sort of like all of this fucking chaos that like, that his administration really like started. I know stuff had been going on, Clinton sanctions on Iraq, this is part of a long history, but he really like, he took it in a, he amplified it, and with the Patriot Act. So for him to compare that to January 6th, I just thought was like the most like disgusting thing.
I
And
think
what's interesting is that
Sorry.
it was January 6th, the fact that it's being used, has been used and is being used to do more of like the Patriot Act type stuff, and they're not done yet. And I was on the ground in DC in the days leading up to that event. I was not there. I left the morning of January 6th, but January 4th was the day that the extradition ruling for the Julian Assange case was read. So we were in DC protesting. And so in the days leading up to that event, I was there. Like we did kind of a joint venture, Force the Vote for Medicare for All protest, followed by a Julian Assange protest. And it was like a whole like 3-day event. Like we were like kind of bounced protests off each other. And that the first Force the Vote protest, there was maybe like 25, 30 protesters. I mean, this is, in the middle of January, we didn't have a lot of people out. But there was like 50 cops for like 25 of us. And then a couple of days later on the January 6th, which everybody knew was going to happen. Like we were in, like they were talking about it at Dunkin' Donuts and at the gas station when we went and like talked to people. So they knew it was coming. And then there was more cops at a little Force the Vote protest than there was at this huge Trump rally. And I mean, come on, it was just so apparent that it was just a farce. It was really just a farce. And the fact that it's being used and compared to 9/11, and we're acting like, and that's not to say that there isn't this kind of extreme right wing a group, there of course there are those people. I think it's much smaller than they're pretending that it is, and it's much less of a threat than it actually is. And certainly January 6th was not a coup attempt by any stretch.
There's a long game that's going on that the Democrats, in concert with their best bedfellows, the national security state, are playing. And the reason people like Bush have been able to be rehabilitated, number one, is because of Donald Trump coming into power. And that, as we all know now, was a nightmare for the national security state. And the national security state said, we're not going to let this happen again. We're going to get back to not just the status quo that we enjoyed under Obama, that we enjoyed under Bush Jr., under Clinton. We're going to not just get back, but consolidate beyond that under Biden. And that's what they're doing. That's what they've been doing. That's what allows Bush to traipse around the country, making appearances like this, and also to make claims, to make comparisons between January 6th and 9/11, because it plays right into the narrative that the national security state, which again is the Democrats' key ally here, it plays right into the narrative that they want to perpetuate to consolidate their power. And they have no moral compass, the Democrats or the national security state. So they're totally fine rehabilitating war criminals if that means it gives the narrative they want to put forth an advantage. And we're seeing all types of escalations of what we've seen in the past under this national security state ramping up. We're seeing more and more online censorship, platforms being taken down, episodes being taken down, and very obviously certain sectors of political commentary and analysis being targeted. Mm-hmm. And I think that we can also see it in the latest report that came out about the CIA plotting to essentially murder Assange, if not kidnap him. And
which they've already done. They already kidnapped him, essentially.
Right. So Max broke this story using much better sourcing and reporting on it much better back in May of 2020. This story comes out last Sunday. Michael Isikoff who is a devout Russiagator,
Yeah.
Russiagate fantasist par excellence. He contributed to this so-called breaking story, and without evidence, he injects in there more Russiagate bullshit about how there was a plan that the CIA very much had their finger on, a plan by the Russians to, and he keeps using this word, even in interviews that he gives, Isikoff, to spirit Assange away from the embassy in London back to Russia. And when I read that piece, to me, it was so obviously not out of concern for Assange or for media freedom. It was to, in some sort of insidious, sly way, perpetuate the Russiagate narrative and further solidify the national security state, which is back on a podium again, an even higher podium this time. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I watched the interview he just did, Isikoff did, with Aaron Mate on
I haven't seen that
Pushback.
yet. Is it good?
It's good, and Aaron does a really good job of pushing back. But there's one point where
you
Isikoff,
you have to give Isikoff a little bit of credit, the fact that he's willing to go on that show.
Yes,
you know?
I will. Yes, absolutely.
right? But
Most of these people would not, you know.
but
do
he should be taken to task for the fact that he said during that interview, he essentially blamed Julian Assange for Seth Rich's murder and said that should
No,
be,
he did not.
and said that should be brought up at Assange's trial.
No, he
Well, he
did
said, I don't know if he
not.
blamed him for his murder, but he basically said that Assange sort of like got the conspiracy started, like that like led to this far, you know.
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I
Well,
mean, listen.
he's basically arguing that Assange kind of like catapulted that into the public imagination. Whereas if you listen to the interview or that clip with Assange that Aaron played, Assange is like, I mean, he's laying out this DNC like official, you know, this person is like murdered in Washington D.C. and you know we have different sources that are worried because of the fact things like this happen. So I mean, could you just imagine like if this happened in another country, like if like a mid-level sort of person in an opposition party to Putin was killed in a park in Moscow. I mean, couldn't you see American journalists saying, "Oh, our sources are worried because people are being killed"?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? It wouldn't be a big deal. But the way that Assange says it too, he says, you know, we're not certain about the conclusion. We're just saying we don't know exactly what happened. We're just saying that the fact that this happened, it, you know,
makes people worried.
Makes people
Justifiably
worried.
so.
And so he never like in that interview, he didn't say that like it wasn't conclusive, you know, what he was saying, that what happened. And so I thought that Isikoff, I mean, kind of piles on Assange like that. That was one of the things he uses to attack Assange. But I think like a common thread that I see in everything that you were mentioning, Jesse, is what we would see as gatekeepers. And they exist in politics. I know they exist in academia, and I know they exist in journalism. So someone like Isikoff, you know, he doesn't mention the Gray Zone article at all. I mean, Max's like breakthrough research showing the UC Global connection to Sheldon Adelson and the spying on the Ecuadorian embassy. I mean, it's like, you know, it's crazy that I mean, like Max has done all this like really important investigative studies, and mainstream journalists will just like, you know, come out with a piece a year and a half later, basically kind of rewriting partially what he said and just like not even.
Yeah, they just essentially took his article, threw in some Russiagate, and was like breaking news. You know what I mean?
Isikoff is able to get quotes from inside the Beltway people, like in these agencies, because you know he's not writing for the Gray Zone, he's writing for Yahoo News or whatever major outlet, you know, that he was allowed to write for. So you know, he's able to develop contacts, and so that can, and I mean, so the only good thing I see about it though is that because it kind of, that article, that Yahoo piece has like mainstream acceptability.
Yes.
It made it blow up. And so there were all these Google News articles saying like, CIA plotted assassination.
It's been on
Assange.
CBS. It's been on ABC. So there's been a lot of controversy amongst the Assange activism community because there is so much misinformation in that article that a lot of people are hesitant to share it because it does perpetuate a lot of bullshit. But to me, and this is just me personally, don't come for me, Assange people. I love you. But to me, I think that we have to use this to our advantage.
You have Assange on your wall. You're like,
I do.
We're all Assange people. So they.
I'm like hardcore Assange people. In fact, on Twitter, I don't know if you know this, I'm an Assange cult leader. I lead the Assange cult. I'm a cultist. I'm an Assangist. That's what everybody calls me. So there you go. You're talking to the cult leader.
Awesome.
But yeah,
I've been looking for this religion for a long time.
You just met your people.
Welcome to the temple.
But yeah, the fact that this is a mainstream article, and I've been battling with myself over the past 6 months or so because I've been trying to brainstorm of ways that we can bring people into the cause, and I feel like it's really difficult because it is such a complex, over a decade long. There's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot. And so I feel like if you throw too much at people, it can be a little daunting and it can turn some people off. And so a lot of people are like, oh, we can't share this article unless we debunk it point by point. And I feel like that's maybe just too much. So I feel like for me, I've been trying to use it to my advantage to get more eyes on it. And then we can have those conversations about how this is bullshit and this is bullshit. And really, dude. But it's a difficult thing because there has been damn near a complete media blackout of what's happening to Julian Assange over the past decade. It's very rare to get any kind of mainstream coverage, and when you do, it's garbage. It's lies. It's deep state smears about him smearing poop on the wall or not taking care of his cat or whatever, and that gets perpetuated by people.
Wasn't there something about a skateboard or?
Yeah, he skateboards through the hallways, and that gets perpetuated by people who are supposed to be like independent lefties, like Crystal Ball on her show, and and people,
all those Hollywood movies. Remember how there were like multiple Hollywood movies that came out
that are all garbage.
So when I was reading this Yahoo News piece, I mean, what was useful about it is you have these people on the record saying that they were trying to divide WikiLeaks, create problems within their institution, go after his reputation, all these sorts of things. And so I really think what we know is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, who knows what they did to, go after these people, in different ways. I mean, it's just speculation, but knowing, if you study the history, like if you read Philip Agee's book, Inside the Company, or, read Killing Hope by William Blum, the history of US intelligence. And so if they really saw this as a hostile intelligence agency that was, what they call it, trading information, then and the gloves were off. I mean, I'm sure they did a lot that we don't know about. Going after these people.
I mean, they offered immunity to a career criminal, convicted child molester, and diagnosed sociopath to, completely fabricate testimony against Julian Assange. I mean, just completely lied.
What about the Swedish charges?
Yeah,
charges. I mean,
that's
I remember when that first came out. One of the ladies, didn't she have some sort of connection to like
the CIA
Cuban, or some sort of Cuban regime change?
NGO. Yeah.
So I've always wondered about that.
That's complete bullshit. Nils Melzer, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, has done an amazing job of really investigating that whole situation. And that's all. I mean, it's really difficult now. That's honestly, as an Assange activist, that's one of the most difficult things to combat against, because it is such an emotionally driven issue, and especially in like the post Me Too era where we have to believe all survivors. I'm not a believe all survivors kind of gal, because I'm aware of the fact that it is used as a political weapon. And when you're Julian Assange and you've made the most powerful people really angry, of course they're going to use that against you.
Well, have the women said anything? And I mean, I don't want to get like too graphic here, but I remember like when I was reading about it, the thing was like in Sweden, like something like if the condom breaks, like
so in Sweden the laws, rape is very different than what we think of here in the United States. The legal term, like the legal definition of rape, is very, very different. And so there were two different women. One of them said that he said that he was using a condom and then took it off in the middle. But then, there's amazingly no DNA on this condom that was supposedly being used and then taken off.
Okay. I
So
didn't know all this.
yeah, it's honestly a lot. It's a lot. Like I could go into like a whole, like very detailed. I mean, the one woman, she didn't even write her own statement. They like wrote it for her. She refused to sign it. Like she just wanted him to take an AIDS test. Like that's all. She didn't want any charges to be pressed. She just wanted an STD test.
She's on the record of saying that.
Yes, and
yeah. So it was sort of like maybe maybe it was like worst case scenario. Maybe it was like a case of him sort of being thrust into fame, and all of a sudden he has these like women around him.
It's a honeypot. This is
and
all
he,
it is.
like a rock star. He maybe he slept around maybe a little too much, and these women were upset, or like you said, it could be a honeypot intelligence type operation. So who knows? But I mean, whatever the case is, like this isn't like violent rape or something.
No.
And I think
and furthermore, it has nothing to do with what he's being charged with currently. And so a lot of this stuff gets brought up that is completely irrelevant. That has, if you want, he has on numerous occasions been willing to cooperate with the Swedish investigation. He has said when it first came about, he was in Sweden. He asked permission to leave. He waited for 3 weeks. He then asked permission to leave before he left. And then even after he left, and then after he was in the Ecuadorian embassy,
Mueller never interviewed him. He offered to be interviewed.
Yes, no,
2 or 3 years of Russiagate.
Yeah.
And they never interviewed him. I mean,
amazing, right? Amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to believe that that's all legitimate. I mean, it's just ridiculous. He's been completely cooperative throughout the whole situation. He has always volunteered to take part in that investigation. And if you want an investigation to happen on the Swedish rape case, I'm all for that. Let's do that. Julian Assange himself is all for that. He wants his day in court. But that has nothing to do with what he's being charged with. And neither does Russiagate, neither does 2016. What
about the Swedish, the boy that came out that like was like one of their informants? That did you see that? Like was the kid, it was like a young guy that came out that.
Oh, are you talking about Siggy Thordarson?
I think so.
That's the convicted child molester and diagnosed sociopath. So he was a low-level volunteer for WikiLeaks who did like fundraising operations. And the FBI offered him immunity so that he would take part in like a kind of a, I don't know, like he fabricated a bunch of testimony. There's a whole article out in Student, which is an Icelandic magazine, where they did an investigative piece where they did hours of interviews with him. He brought a whole bunch of like actual hardcore evidence, DMs, group chats, emails, all of that stuff, where everything their entire case over the past 6 months or so, whatever case that they had, which they never really had one, has completely disintegrated. Whether it's the UC Global stuff, the Siggy Thordarson stuff, the Yahoo article, the Max Blumenthal article, they have no case. And the fact that he's still in prison right now is infuriating.
Yeah, I think they're trying to kill him.
They are. They always have been.
And just going back to the long game, I agree with you, Misty, that it's important that this story is out, but we still have to be super wary, especially given where it's coming from. And it's very telling that in the interview with Aaron, Isikoff says, I believe twice, that he was at the Center for Strategic and International Studies when Pompeo made those remarks in April of 2017. Why is he there? Why is Yahoo's national security journalist, or whatever his title is, something along those lines, why is he there? It's not unheard of for that to happen, but why is he covering Pompeo, who's coming out and basically declaring war against WikiLeaks in 2017, right after, or almost right after, Hillary's loss and the brain implosion of neoliberals?
It was really Vault 7 that pissed him off.
Right.
That's really what it was.
And why is Isikoff putting this piece out now? And why are these allegedly 30 intelligence officials speaking now? And I think it goes back to them playing the long game, and they're looking toward next year with the midterms, and they're looking toward 2024 as well. And they're getting their chips set up early this time because they're, especially with Trump still in the mix, people like Nikki Haley in the mix, people like Pompeo in the mix.
Yeah.
They're gonna start as early as they can to make sure that 2016 never happens again. That's where I see it.
What about, do you think it's, I mean, could it be possible that they know that Assange is going to get out and that they want to sort of like put the blame more on the Trump officials for, you know, that they took this too far and that they made a mess of this?
I think that that's always kind of been
that could be part of it, but I think in the article, I mean, there's like the problem with Isikoff, and I'm sure he's integrated into these circles, so he's, you know, has friends in there, and he's, you know, in that you know, in that sphere of those people, but he really takes his gospel. I mean, like, that was the interesting thing about the Aaron Mate interview, because when Isikoff is saying things like, well, I know that this so-and-so, you know, CIA officials are saying this happened, so we know that this happened. So he's taking for gospel whatever these officials tell him. So of course, then they're going to keep talking to him for his articles, because he's paraphrasing or directly quoting them and not challenging it. And so when they say the things about the Russian, you know, that a Russian airplane could take him smuggle him out of the UK and all these things. And I mean, I thought that was such a joke. The place is surrounded by 3 blocks of intelligence officials. Have you been to London? It's like the most CCTV'd place like on the planet Earth. And for them to say that he could
don't even get me started.
I mean, to me, that was like a complete red herring.
Yes.
And I think, you know, that's why, I mean, to me, it's just shocking that Aaron is not on Democracy Now! To talk about these things, but they have on Isikoff and these other, I mean, like when I got involved in the anti-war movement, Democracy Now! Was like my bread and butter. Like I was
Amy Goodman broke
day.
My heart.
And the coup in Haiti in 2004, I mean, Democracy Now!, like growing up, it was like so important. And now it's just like, it's awful. Like, I mean, I retweeted their interview with Isikoff because I just thought, wow, they're actually talking about WikiLeaks. But I mean, like, they never, all those years of the war in Syria, I don't think they once mentioned Timber Sycamore, you know, that we were dropping $1 billion of weapons annually into that conflict that was being, you know, channeled into all these different sectarian militia groups. And I mean, so they're not the War and Peace Report anymore. Like, it's just kind of like a side issue for them. So well, I guess
isn't the intro tagline the quarantine report?
It is now.
So they're no longer the War and Peace Report. Yeah.
Amy Goodman legitimately broke my heart, though.
Yeah,
like watching her like slide down, and it really started after Standing Rock. The noticeable downward trend started after Standing Rock. It just like, and she is just like steadily, it hurts.
What do you think happened? I
honestly don't know. I don't know if it's some kind of funding thing. I don't know if maybe
they're tied in with some big funders.
Yeah. So, and that's always, I mean, follow the money. I mean, they say that for a reason. So it's really depressing, because honestly, I have a thing called lady crushes. And it's like another woman who like I really admire, and like I want to be her when I grow up. And Amy Goodman growing up was one of my like biggest lady crushes. I loved her. She was such a badass. And now it's like she's a shell of her former self, and it's so depressing.
Well, I think the Democracy Now! Crew, including Jeremy Scahill, they collectively lost their minds when Trump won, because they'd been waiting for so long, it seems like, for someone like Trump to come to power so that they could ramp up even more this rhetoric they'd been using toward Bush Jr., toward Obama, and rightly so. But when it's like they had this fantasy of a tyrant taking over the US, and they saw that in Trump, whether it was true or not, it wasn't true, but they went with true, and they went all out with that. And they're either stuck in that groove, or they they're stuck in that groove whether they want to be or not, and that's all they know how to go with. And it's the same thing with the Intercept. And
I think there's
and
this whole sort of like ecosystem in Brooklyn of
Yes.
kind of like these like media types that, you know, they're real, like it's very careerist, and they're very worried about being associated with like openly like anti-imperialists or people that like, you know, or would be considered like enemies of the state or something, you know, because I mean all the different funding relationships. So
yeah, it's very careerist.
yeah.
It's really depressing. But that actually, when you said earlier that they're kind of wanting to use Trump as like the fall guy for this, I honestly, and that you can not tinfoil hattie, I don't think, but I think that was kind of always the plan. Barack Obama desperately wanted to go after Julian Assange, but he was worried about his legacy. He didn't want to be known as the guy that killed the First Amendment, and so they handed it off to Trump. And you know, Trump is an idiot, and he's a bully, and he's very easily manipulated. And so yeah, he'll do it. He'll be that guy. And so I think that was always kind of the fallback plan, that they have this universally despised figure that they can, you know, put this on, and then they don't have to worry about, you know, it looking bad for Barack Obama or Joe Biden. And I said this all along, because everybody's like, oh, but when Joe Biden gets elected, you know, he'll be able to save Julian Assange. No, what he'll be able to do is say, sorry, it's already in motion. We have to let the courts figure it out. I can't do anything about it. And that's exactly what he's been doing this whole time, is just, you know, passing the buck, and, you know, we'll circle back, as Jen Psaki always says, you know, and they
We'll
constantly
circle back.
dodge questions about it. You know what I'm saying? And
I like the image of her from you know, what's the, you know, the Peanuts cartoon.
yes,
Who
yeah,
are they comparing? Did
Peppermint
you see
Patty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I was like, whoa, they got that.
You can't
spot on.
unsee it once you see it. Now, every time I see her, I think about Peppermint Patty. It's so funny. But yeah, I mean, I think that was, and Joe Biden, like everybody, it was very amusing to me when people were like, oh, but when Joe Biden gets elected, then Julian Assange, Joe Biden called Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist. That's the exact same terminology that Mitch McConnell used. You really think Joe Biden?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Yeah. Biden is like, there. I mean, these are all these people. I mean, they're all part of this like bipartisan, you know, blob that, you know, functions to reproduce our empire and the, you know, the system that which we live in, where there's no Medicare for all. You know, our insurance is connected to, you know, it's employer insurance. You know, since the late 19th century, general strikes, you know, they broke those up by, you know, unions can't organize across sectors. So you can't have like a cross-sectoral strike. I mean, I ran into that when I was at university, and we had to do a strike, and it was actually illegal for union like janitors to do a strike together with like the graduate students or the staff, you know, the secretarial work. I mean, it was like we couldn't like legally do it. So there's all these laws in place, and you know, our political scene, we, unlike a lot of other more social democratic leaning bourgeois democracies like Canada or in Europe, Western Europe, where some of their political parties emerged out of labor movements. Like, we don't have that in our country. And so, you know, we just have this really like warped situation that we're living through. And I think Trump was sort of like this flood of embarrassment for him, because he had not passed through the sort of traditional gatekeepers of our political scene. He, you know, he had so much money, and he's like this like Hollywood guy, and, you know, he could just go in there and, you know, he made it to the top through the electoral system. And, you know, it was a huge embarrassment for him. And so ever since then, you know, they've used that to crack down. But the crazy thing is that he really, he kept all this stuff going. He just intensified a lot of it. Like the craziest thing about Russiagate is that, you know, while they, you know, called him a Russian agent, and, you know, Putin had things on him from Russian prostitutes urinating on his face, or, I mean, like these like super crazy stories that they invented. And, you know, and people passing information to the Russians, blah, blah, blah. And that was in the news every day. In reality, he was leaving the non-proliferation treaties. He was, you know, continuing wars on, you know, economic war in Venezuela, which has in Iran, which both have good relations with Russia. You know, they were trying to block the pipeline, the natural gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, which
Mhm.
is such like a important international investment for both those countries. And I think
Nord
also
Stream
for,
2.
yeah, and I think also for maintaining peace, because if these countries are cross invested, that's like gives them, reasons to have, good diplomatic relations. He was doing all sorts of things.
Yeah, let's not forget that
Crimea,
he
yeah.
unilaterally moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem
Mhm.
and officially stole the Golan Heights in Syria and
He was
gave,
more hawkish on Russia
or
than Obama was. I mean,
he let Israel officially steal the Golan Heights, and then
mhm.
Israel renamed the Golan Heights Trump Heights.
Such a joke.
But
The only thing
the
that they
blob,
didn't
but the
like about
blob,
Trump,
sorry. Uh-huh.
the only thing that they didn't like about Trump is that he had no gift for subtlety and would
Yeah.
occasionally like just blurt out the truth that he wasn't supposed to say out loud.
We kill people, you don't think
We're gonna
we
take
kill
their
people?
oil.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? He just he never knew when to keep his mouth shut. And so he was kind of he's a wild card. He was kind of an embarrassment. And he was a little bit more, I mean, he was very easy to control. He did everything that they wanted him to do, or that they wanted him to do. It's not like he
Yeah.
went against the grain in any way, despite what his supporters love to think. Listen, Trump supporters, your dude is not your friend. He's an establishment stooge. You got Obama'd. You need to deal with that. Like his supporters need to deal with that. They got Obama'd. But yeah, the only thing that they didn't like about him is that he was he just has a big mouth, and sometimes he would speak truth that he wasn't supposed to say.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing for them.
Yeah, yeah.
So going back to this long game concept that I've been hammering away at, I think one of the major parts of it is the mandates, the vaccine mandates, and the proposed passports that are coming out, that are being foisted upon us. And in my estimation, a lot of that has to do with the perpetuation of global capital, the consolidation of global capital under big pharma, et cetera. And you recently co-edited a symposium on COVID-19 vaccine testing, production, and distribution internationally for the American Sociological Association, with which you're affiliated. So perhaps we can talk about that a little bit. I don't know what your personal view is of the vaccines and the mandates and the passports, but it certainly does all seem very glaringly an attempt not just at control, but at, again, expanding and consolidating capitalist power globally.
Yeah, I think the study you're referring to, the short introduction I wrote with some colleagues in these papers that we edited and gathered, it was basically looking at production, distribution, and one, I can't remember the other one, of looking at how
Testing.
And testing of the vaccine globally. So the uneven nature of that in different countries, and really looking at how so much of the vaccines were so much more readily available to wealthier countries, and looking at the companies and sort of powerful states that had their own vaccines, and how, so for example, I think Cuba has had like 2 or 3 of its own vaccines it's made, and but there's all these US attempts to block them from distributing that, or lack of resources they have to produce large levels of that. And so we sort of looked at how that's been playing out. A real interesting case, you mentioned Israel earlier. Their government made all these deals, I believe it was with Pfizer, maybe some other companies, and they sort of negotiated with other powerful countries to basically kind of become like the initial test case for the vaccine. So they had some of the highest rates of vaccinated population, and they got the vaccine early on. And so, whereas, if you crossed into the Gaza Strip, it was like hardly any, it was like no vaccine available. So you saw the inequity in that distribution. And then as the pandemic is ongoing, the U.S. is still intensifying sanctions on a lot of countries, and countries in ways that have like gutted their medical systems, like in Venezuela or on Syria. So yeah, we sort of looked at that like geopolitical, that sort of geo-economic structure of the planet, and how how these are being produced and distributed in very unequal ways. That was what we looked at.
So do you see it as a control mechanism of sorts, economically, socially, etc.?
I think it's you can't separate it like from the structure of our global system of how global capitalism functions, where we have these larger and larger monopolies that dominate so much of the planet's wealth. I think right now there was this new Oxfam study saying that 1% of the world's population, that's about 63 million people, they produce twice the carbon pollution as the bottom half, the 3.1 billion people who make up the poorest half of humanity. And if you look at that 1%, that 63 million, the wealthiest people in the world that have multiple homes and huge footprint on the planet. So many of those people live in the US. By far, we have the largest chunk of that wealthiest part of the world's population. So I think we have to look at these dynamics, like how they exist today in our own global society, but also their historic roots in colonialism, the way in which the global South was underdeveloped for centuries, with resources looted through colonialism, and now today through this transnational global economy we have, where the US is still the Pax Americana, the global empire with it was more than 100 bases around the world. I think Russia has like one base outside of its borders. I think China has like one in East Africa. So it's I think the Russian economy is about the same as the economy of Italy. So to say that like this is a big threat to our country, our Pentagon budget dwarfs all of those countries. So I think what we see now is, I think a lot of the blame in the media and by political leaders is really going after working people and poor people that for one reason or another don't believe in the what they're being told about the vaccine, or there's a lot of differences over how people want to handle this in their life. And instead of thinking about it, that though this is actually like, we're a society where most people don't have decent health care, where our country spending so much of its money on bombing brown people on the other side of the planet, instead of actually like looking at like the real sort of powers behind the scene. Again, like they're punching down. And so yeah, like I have the vaccine, and I'm not like, I don't consider myself an anti-vaxxer, but
I have it too.
But at the same time, yeah, I don't.
I do not.
But this idea of like mandates, I don't like.
No,
that doesn't make sense to me.
and I think an awful lot of time is spent, like you just mentioned, punching down. And I think that we really need to start paying more attention to the fact that our governmental institutions and these corporations have created such an environment of distrust that there is cause for people to be hesitant, and there's cause for people to be skeptical about what they're being told. And anytime that there's such a dramatic push to force something upon people, I'm immediately skeptical. Red flags go up all over the place when that happens. And like you said, if it were really about health, if it were really about keeping everybody healthy, we would have Medicare for all. We wouldn't be, attempting to prevent Cuba from, developing their vaccines, or we wouldn't be, there wouldn't be these kinds of attempts to stifle those sorts of developments for a vaccine. It should be like a global team effort to get this under control, right? And because we don't see that, that immediately makes me hesitant, and it makes me skeptical. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I say this all the time because people call me an anti-vaxxer constantly. I was on a list in 2015 of people that anti-vaxxers hate. You know what I mean? Like, I spent a very probably 3, 4, 5 years in the pro-vaccine world. And so I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any stretch of the imagination. But
but at the same time, you're not happy that we live in a world where your vaccine has to come from this like big pharma monopoly,
right?
That's the only option you have.
Yes.
Right. But that doesn't mean that like you'd want to go with no vaccine and get COVID-19.
No, I just want transparency. I want there to be a system where I can have trust in these institutions. I want there to be, I don't want to be forced to do anything. I want there to be legitimate studies. I don't want to, the people who are forcing these things upon us are known liars. I mean, these are people who just over the course of the pandemic have been caught lying to us repeatedly. And yet I'm supposed to trust them when they tell me that this vaccine's the best thing for me to do. No, that's not okay. And I'm all about transparency. Obviously, I'm a WikiLeaks advocate and a Julian Assange, activist. So I'm all about transparency, and we have none. There is no transparency. And then you give these big pharma companies complete immunity. There's no accountability if anything happens.
So the problem is we live the reality that we live in, that we produce our existence in. We are always entwined with all these like fucked up things, like if you drink milk, right, you're buying from this company, or that's like pumping hormones into cattle, and just like
and that goes back to the global capital thing,
wrecking watersheds, and like the massive pollution. So it's like kind of like no matter what you do, so you have to have a historical and a structural critical understanding of the world that we live in. And I think then you can kind of like figure out, what we can target, and with the people and resources we have, to be in solidarity with working people, and with people in the global South that are really taking the brunt of this damage that our empire and that the system is wrecking upon the planet.
So speaking of the global South, before we wrap, I want to ask you, because you've done a lot of work with regard to the global South, what is happening at the border with Haiti, with Haitian migrants, and what your assessment is of all of that, going from the earthquake that happened there recently, the assassination that happened there recently, to where we are now at the US's southern border. We're seeing Haitian migrants being whipped by horseback
Those are reins,
riding.
Jesse.
Yeah, a whip is a whip.
I mean, again, and I teach sociology, and so in sociology, there's different sort of like schools of thought, how you understand stuff happening in the world. Like there's what you call a positivist approach, where it's more like how we study physics or biology, where it's like taking measurements and building categories, statistics and these things. And then there's another approach that is more like looking at sort of like the totality of world situation, and understanding particular events or particular situations or processes as they relate to the totality. So they're actually part and parcel of that totality. And so when we look at something like the events in the border right now, you can't separate that from the history of Haiti. It's the formation of its political economy, the formation of Pax Americana and the Monroe Doctrine. We're going back. I mean, there, if you read Gerald Horne, a professor in Texas, he has a book where he looks at actually that one of the very early U.S. intelligence operations in like the in the mid 19th century was supporting some different Spanish-speaking elites on the eastern side of the island of Hispaniola in the Caribbean to rebel against the Haitians, because after the Haitian Revolution, they had liberated the eastern side of the island, which had been a Spanish colony, and the slaves there were liberated. And so the Dominican Republic split off from Haiti, and it became two countries on this one island. That was actually the island that Christopher Columbus had initially, had landed on. So this long history of, the U.S. intervention, the War of 1899, taking Puerto Rico and Cuba, and then we occupied Haiti around the First World War and supported, multiple interventions in the country. We basically took control of the ports where the taxes would be collected, and setting up banking systems. And so the U.S. really sort of like set up a gendarme, a military force in the country, and we became like the major like regional hegemon of the Caribbean. And moving into the Cold War, you had this Cold War dictatorship, the Duvalier dynasty, that falls apart. You have this democratic interregnum in the country where the popular movements are able to really blossom in the country and have a big role in the 90s and the early 2000s. And Bush administration really smashed that apart in 2004 as part of these post 9/11, you're with us or against us attacks. It wasn't just, we always focus on Iraq and Afghanistan, but they were doing it in other parts of the world. They're different, these hard attacks, and Haiti was one of the countries that suffered. And ever since 2004, and then again, especially after the 2010 earthquake, the U.S. and its allies and these sort of like transnational power brokers have really solidified elites in the country that work with them and sort of have this like facade of democracy when very few people vote. The turnout in elections in Haiti is like always less than 20% now, where it was in 70, 80, 90% when popular movements and the left had a bigger role in the country prior to the 2004 coup. So the poor have really been disenfranchised in the country. And with the earthquake, you've had a lot of people trying to leave the country, going to refugee status, a lot into the Dominican Republic, into the working in the farms, and a lot of people. So the Haitians, from what I know, that have been at the border, at the U.S. border in Texas, primarily have come up from South America. There were a lot that were able to get into Argentina post earthquake, and facing a lot of racism and difficult time, lack of support, of state support. And because there's so many Haitian Americans in the U.S., because we're this powerful economy that there are so many jobs and opportunities here, people try to come here. The push and pull factors of global migration, and they've been the security forces of the border are going to repress them like they do other migrants that come across the border. And so the photos have been probably shocking though, because there's so many Haitians that came together, and the sort of like racialized imagery is so so clear, seeing these guys on horseback, these white security officers like whipping down on all of these all these negatively racialized migrants that are trying to cross in.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I thought it was particularly disgusting to see Tulsi Gabbard on Fox News say, almost within the same breath, that the immigration policy now, as if there even is one, should revert to Trump's. That was a successful one. So these people should just be turned back and left to fend for themselves. And right after that, or right before that, she said, but Joe Biden is my friend. I don't mean to malign him here in criticizing whatever pathetic semblance of an immigration policy his administration has.
Mhm.
So it really just shows you that example that America's colonial racist roots are not just alive and well, but they're growing. And it has come to infect people like Tulsi Gabbard, who wasn't ever really a bastion of radicalism, but
No.
there was a point where she was at least seemingly willing to make a break with the national security status quo. And
She took a few brave stances, right?
She
Right.
did. She's great on Assange. God damn it.
and she's totally backtracked on most, if not all of that. And that, I think, again, points to the fact that the Dems are back in power under Biden. The national security state is back in power under Biden. And people, whether they're still in government or not, these careerists are hedging their bets and they're playing the long game. And even if that means looking at Haitian migrants who've suffered some of the worst colonial and neocolonial horrors imaginable, if that means looking at them being whipped away from the American border and lauding Trump's equally psychopathic border policy, then they're going to do it. And that overall just speaks to how far the rot of American empire has gone on. And I think that what we're seeing are very clear symptoms of the end of empire, but it
Here's
remains to
hoping.
be seen.
There was a tweet. We were talking about Ron Placone earlier. I can mention Ron again. He had a good tweet where he was saying, I believed in Bernie, he let me down. I believed in AOC and she let me down. I believed in Tulsi and she let me down. Or I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
But that was like totally spot on. And I think, Tulsi had a few brave statements when the fact that she, went to Syria during the dirty war and was willing to speak out against the, against the dirty war. I mean, that was like amazing. And being a vet, my skepticism of Tulsi early on was because of the connections with basically neo-fascist organizations in India. I think at her wedding, there was people from the RSS, which is sort of like the black shirt like party or organization in India, which is like probably one of the biggest. RSS, I think, is like the biggest actual fascist organization like in the world right now. And I think she was going to go to a talk by another group called VHP, I believe they're called. And they're also like a fascist organization in India. So she had a lot of like these real sort of like Hindu fascist organizations that saw her because of the fact that she's Hindu and was, not criticizing Modi. And they're sort of like the far right. And Modi's right wing, but these groups are far right wing, but they sort of push Modi in their direction. And so they sort of saw her as someone that they could kind of like attach themselves to. And so that was always like, even though I was so happy about some things she was saying, it was always kind of this like conflict, in my head, like, Jesus Christ, she's also like befriending these people. So now I think with what she said recently, I mean, she's just blown like any credibility she had, with anti-war left.
Yes, and I've always been very confused by the fact that anybody considered her to be anti-war. She's literally a currently serving member of the Empire's army.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, she's not anti-war. I mean, I'm really hopeful. Like when Ron Placone said something, put that tweet out, and I've seen other people mention things similar. I'm really hoping that this will lead to people, stop, like, just don't put personality above policy. I give her props when she deserves props, when she comes out in defense of Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, or all of that stuff. Like, give her props for that. But we have to maintain, get away from the cult of personality. Like, just because you agree with her on one thing doesn't mean that she is infallible. Doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders is infallible because you agree with him on Medicare for all or whatever. I'm a huge advocate of politicians being scrutinized relentlessly. Every vote they take, every statement they make, every meeting they have, everything. Like, none of them should be above reproach. We need to stop celebritizing our politicians. It's this team mentality and this whole, I'm team Tulsi, or I'm team Bernie, or I'm team AOC, or I'm team Ted Cruz, or whatever. That's really a bad idea. We have to really try to get away from that mentality in this country. It's really detrimental.
I think part of the problem we have is that part of what it's rooted in is that we don't have this, we don't have like left institutions or like a popular front type party, and we don't have the sort of like working gears of a real left in our country. So things become very personalized. There's always sort of fights. Like, I've written something before and somebody disagreed with that I've known, I've been talking on Twitter for 10 years, and then they're like, block me, or like people are like canceled like that, like on the left and like social media. And it's not like, it's sort of like a mirage of a left, and I mean, I know there are like, groups that I think doing really good work, these different veterans organizations, Answer has done really good anti-sanctions protests, Code Pink, there's a whole array of organizations, the Black Alliance for Peace. There's a lot of different groups across our country that are doing good work, but the difficulty is that so much of it is sort of, like you said, personality based, and there's a lot of activism on campuses. But then when people leave campus, if you're not integrated into like a party or an institution or some sort of like coherent organization or structure, you just sort of get swept up into, the job market and making sure you have employee-based insurance and paying off your loans and any home you buy. And so it's hard to have a coherent project. So people then glue on to, any glimmers of hope. Like I think a lot of people did with the Squad. And now we just see, how, a total utter disaster that is. I mean, I was really happy the other night with, I watched, is it Rashida Tlaib, her talk denouncing the Israeli dome, all the money that we're spending on that. But it's like, she was just like, it's just her and this like one talk that she gave. I mean, this isn't going to like build a revolution in the US if we just have these sort of like momentary clips on Twitter. Like there has to be like something like a
cohesive movement. Yeah.
Right. And even when she makes a statement like that, it goes back to what you were saying as far as looking at the historical totality. So her statements are focused on funding for the Iron Dome, but there's no analysis there or recognition of the fact that Israel has multiple other so-called missile defense systems that the U.S. helps to fund and maintain. And
to be fair, though, I mean, she only had like a minute and a half, to be able to go into all that. But I agree with you. Yeah, it's a bigger thing.
I just think in general, her approach, it's very inconsistent. All of them, they're very inconsistent. It's very, they don't ever work together. They won't vote as a block. They won't join together to prevent. I mean, you have AOC voting present on, the dome, even though her vote makes no difference whatsoever. They won't join together for force the vote. They won't. I mean, it's like there's no cohesive effort to push forward a progressive agenda at all. It's what they proclaim to be doing, but they're not doing it at all. So it's, I mean, you still have people making excuses and trying to justify this complete lack of will to fight back against the establishment and the status quo, which is the entire purpose that they were supposed to be serving. Many people seem to forget that in 2017, 2018, when they were running, the whole point was we're going to go and we're going to challenge the Democratic establishment. They were coming off of the Bernie situation and and then immediately it's Mama Bear and Rolling Stone covers with Nancy Pelosi.
This whole thing though, this is like in the DNA of our country. I mean, and like Jesse was saying, on the bigger sweep, the long term, you go back to the 1920s and the 30s, like and post World War II with the Red Scare and the breaking apart of socialists and communists, and there was a whole we had labor movements that were like aligned with like socialists and communists, like in the early 20th century, and those labor movements were completely destroyed. Like the AFL-CIO is basically like, that was like the union that like the owners like preferred. Like that was like the compromised union. And so you look today, like in DC, there's what you call the Solidarity Center, which is like 99%, for the last I checked, like 99% funded by the US government, which is the AFL-CIO's foreign arm wing. They're foreign, the wing of the AFL-CIO that works in other countries, and they'll have like officials and embassies all around the world. And they basically like, there's a really good book by a guy named Kim Stipes looking at, I think it's called, I can't remember the name, but it looks at the AFL-CIO labor activities around the world. And so after we broke up our own labor unions, broke up our own leftist institutions, we're doing that all around the world. And you see that with most of our wars that we carry out. They're always targeting either the left or some sort of like sovereign, government that, is neoliberal institutions are not happy about. So
and with the vaccine mandates, we've seen that the AFL-CIO has been very strongly championing mandated vaccines for workers, which is completely contrary to what they ostensibly stand for. Yeah, the ACLU.
Garland Nixon just resigned from their board because of it. I mean, it's really disheartening to see these institutions kind of go against everything that they've proclaimed to be about. It's depressing. I mean, you're right. I mean, this is just how it's always been. These organizations always get co-opted, and here we are. And that's really what the fight is. That's really I mean, we don't have any of these leftist organizations or institutions because they've all been co-opted and then destroyed, and by design. And that's really where the battle is. So,
and also sort of eaten from the inside out by philanthropy. So there's a lot of good work looking at this, like the long-term sort of role of philanthropy, and the sort of like careerism and gatekeeping tied in with that. Like there's a lot of, I mean, on Latin America, there's a group called WOLA, the Washington Office on Latin America. Like when it started initially, it was sort of like one of the main platforms for criticizing the US sort of like dirty wars in Central America. But if you look at WOLA today, I mean, they're just like totally, I mean, they'll make some very slight criticisms of US foreign policy, but they're like totally on board with the sanctions on, on different countries. And, they parrot so many of the national security talking points. It's even with academic outlets, like one of the biggest sort of traditional sort of left academic outlets on Latin America is a group called NACLA, the North American Congress on Latin America. And if you look at, I mean, then they have all these philanthropists that, help to finance their group connected to these different orgs. And so the left kind of, a lot of traditional left institutions more and more have gotten money through different philanthropy organizations like Democracy Now! Too. And I think you see it sometimes slowly, but it eventually it affects the work that these organizations put out, who gets hired to run them, who makes the decisions on the the editorial policies. And so you look at like NACLA today, for example, they're reporting on Nicaragua, or other, like they're reporting on Cuba. I mean, it's it's totally like one-sided. It doesn't talk about the impact of the collective punishment on the population. The fact when you have limited sanctions targeting government officials, it creates an environment where investors don't want to come to the country. There's like major impact by these policies. And I've just been very sort of like, you just see this over and over again with these different left, like these bedrock institutional groups on the left that that slip once they have these philanthropy connections.
It's depressing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's depressing. Anyway, we've taken up too much of your time. I really appreciate you joining us and talking about, and again, thank you for disrupting George W. Bush and for confronting him to his face. We need more of that. I'm sure that took a lot of courage to, I know that you had to have been aware of the fact that that was not going to be a friendly audience. So to have the courage to stand up and speak truth to a war criminal is a really admirable thing. And honestly, just all the best to your cousin. I can't imagine what he's dealing with or what you're dealing with, watching him go through what he's going through. So all the best to him. Hopefully that, he can get whatever help that he needs to get through the bullshit that has been forced upon him. So again, thank you for doing what you're doing. And thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Do you want to tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter, or if you have anything else you want to plug? Thanks,
Misty and Jesse, for having me. It's great. And
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And the well-informed information that you're putting out there it's really important. Yeah, I have a blog. It's jebsprague.blogspot.com. I'm doing blogs. Like I'm like on Friendster and MySpace. Sometimes I read RSS.
You still have an AOL.
So, yeah, I do AOL. So if anybody wants to like find me, what was that one thing what was it called? ASCII, where people would like do designs on you use like fonts to do like art designs. What was that called?
I don't remember. Yeah,
so I'm like, I'm still in that world. I'm just like, I never left it. So
I love it.
So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to meet both of you.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you back anytime. This was a great conversation. So anytime you want to come back on just to shoot the shit, we love just having, conversations with people that we find interesting. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
I'm going to start worshiping at the church of Assange. What did you call it?
Assangists. We're Assangists.
Okay. Yes, and is there like an actual like hierarchy of the church, or like?
Well, I'm the cult leader. That's all I know. That's what I've been told. So I'm the cult leader. And I don't know.
Do we have to like send you like gifts or something, or
gifts are always welcome. Absolutely. Are you kidding? Yeah, you have to sacrifice a baby goat and send me the tears of 3 Greek virgins and
ritually read Vault 7.
Yes. There's a whole initiation process that you have to go through. So we'll talk about that later. I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks a lot. You guys have a good
thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, guys.